It was supposed to be the wedding of the year when everything shattered into pieces. Jessica Williams, 27, was about to marry Michael Thompson at the prestigious Rosewood Estate in Virginia, surrounded by 350 guests from Washington, D.C.'s elite. But while exchanging vows at the altar, Michael spoke words that froze everyone's blood. With a cruel smile on his face, he publicly revealed Jessica's most intimate secrets, humiliating her in front of family, friends, and colleagues. What Michael didn't know was that behind him stood General Robert Williams, the bride's father, and one of the most powerful men in America. A man who had dedicated his life to protecting his country and would never allow anyone to destroy his daughter. What happened in the following minutes would show the world what happens when you underestimate a father's love and the strength of a woman who decides to reclaim her dignity. The Rosewood Estate gleamed under the May sun like a jewel set in the Virginia countryside. 350 guests from Washington, D.C.'s elite had gathered to witness what all the society magazines called the event of the year. Chutters. Jessica Williams, daughter of respected General Robert Williams, was about to marry Michael Thompson, heir to the Thompson real estate empire. Jessica was 27 with classic beauty that recalled Hollywood actresses of the 1960s. She had a law degree from Georgetown, an MBA from Harvard, spoke 4 languages, and worked as an attorney specializing in international law. She was an independent and determined woman, raised with values of honor and integrity that her father had instilled in her. Michael Thompson, 31, was everything society considered a good catch. Handsome, wealthy, charming, with a family that owned half the skyscrapers in New York and Washington. But behind the perfect facade hid a narcissistic manipulator who saw marriage as a business acquisition rather than an act of love. The two had met 2 years earlier at a charity gala. Michael had courted Jessica with the same strategy he used in business: superficial charm, expensive gifts, grandiose promises. Jessica, who had just come out of a difficult relationship, had let herself be won over by what seemed like genuine attention. General Robert Williams, with 60 years of impeccable military career, had always had doubts about Michael. During family dinners, he noticed how the young man only talked about money and success, never showing real interest in Jessica as a person. But he had chosen to remain silent, respecting his daughter's decision to build an autonomous life. Jessica's mother, Sarah, had died in a car accident when the girl was 16. Since then, father and daughter had developed an even deeper bond, based on mutual respect and unconditional love. Robert had raised Jessica, teaching her that strength doesn't come from arrogance, but from dignity and the courage to defend one's principles. That May morning, while Jessica was getting ready in the estate's suite, wearing the lace dress that had belonged to her grandmother, she felt an uneasiness she couldn't explain. In recent weeks, Michael had become increasingly possessive and controlling. He made mean comments about her friends, criticized her work, made her feel inadequate. But Jessica had attributed all this to wedding planning stress. The guests were the cream of Washington society: politicians, entrepreneurs, aristocrats, army generals, judges. Everyone had come to celebrate the union between 2 of America's most respected families. No one imagined that this day would become a nightmare that would make headlines in every newspaper in the country. Michael had spent the morning obsessively checking every detail, not out of love for Jessica, but to ensure everything was perfect for his public image. He had invited journalists and photographers, turning what should have been an intimate moment into a media spectacle. While guests took their seats in the estate's chapel, decorated with thousands of white roses and candles, General Williams prepared to walk his daughter down the aisle. He wore his dress uniform with medals earned in 40 years of service to his country. He was the proudest man in the world at that moment, but also the most worried. In the estate's garden, Jessica waited for the moment to enter the church. Her antique lace dress was a marvel of elegance, Her grandmother's veil framed her radiant face, but behind the smile hid growing anxiety. Something in Michael's behavior in recent days made her uncomfortable, but she couldn't identify what. When the wedding march began to resonate in the chapel, everyone stood up. Jessica entered on her father's arm, walking slowly toward the altar where Michael waited with a smile that seemed strange to her, almost predatory. General Williams escorted his daughter to the altar, gave her a kiss on the forehead, and sat in the front row, right behind the couple. From that privileged position, he could hear every word that would be spoken in the following minutes. What no one knew was that Michael had planned something cruel and unforgivable. He believed that marriage would give him total control over Jessica, and had decided to start their married life with an act of public humiliation that should demonstrate who was in charge of that relationship. He didn't imagine that behind him stood a man who had dedicated his life to protecting what he loved, and who would never allow anyone to harm his daughter. The moment for vows arrived after the traditional reading and prayers. Reverend Matthews, who had baptized Jessica, invited the couple to speak the promises they had written for each other. It was the most anticipated moment of the ceremony, the one all guests waited for with emotion. Jessica spoke first, with a clear voice full of emotion. She spoke of the love she felt for Michael, the life they dreamed of building together, the values she wanted to share with him. Her words were sincere, coming from the heart of a woman who believed she had found her soulmate. Many guests wiped their eyes, moved by the purity of her feelings. When it was Michael's turn, something in his attitude changed. The smile became colder, his eyes harder. He began with apparently sweet words, but in his tone there was a discordant note that only those who knew him well managed to perceive. Then, without warning, Michael deviated from the script. Instead of continuing with promises of love, he began talking about what he called the truth about Jessica. With calculated cruelty, he began revealing intimate details of their private relationship, secrets that Jessica had confided in him during moments of greatest vulnerability. He told everyone present about Jessica's insecurities, her deepest fears, the moments of weakness she had shared with him, believing she could trust him. He turned every confidence into a weapon to humiliate her, every moment of intimacy into material to hurt her publicly. The church began to fill with murmurs. Guests looked at each other incredulously, unable to believe what they were hearing. Jessica gradually paled, feeling the world collapse around her. Her knees began to tremble. Her voice broke in her throat. But Michael didn't stop. He continued telling how Jessica was too emotional to be a good wife, how she had self-esteem problems that he would have to correct during their marriage. He spoke of her as if she were a defective object he had decided to accept, despite her flaws. General Williams, sitting a few meters away, felt every word like a stab. He saw his daughter being destroyed before his eyes, publicly humiliated by the man who should have loved and protected her. His hands closed into fists. His jaw contracted from the effort to control himself. Jessica tried to interrupt Michael, whispering to him to stop, but he silenced her with a hand gesture, as one does with a naughty child. This gesture, more than any word, revealed the true nature of their relationship. Michael considered her his property, someone to control and manipulate. The guests were shocked. Some began to stand up to leave. Others whispered indignantly. Reverend Matthews tried to intervene, but Michael ignored him completely, continuing his destructive monologue. It was then that Michael made the final mistake. He said Jessica should be grateful to marry someone like him, despite being just a soldier's daughter. He added that his family had done a favor to the Williams by accepting this marriage, and that Jessica had to learn to know her place in the new family. Those words cut through the church like a sharp blade. General Williams slowly rose from his chair, his back straight, his gaze icy. 40 years of military discipline had taught him self-control, but also when it was time to act. Michael, still caught up in his delusion of superiority, didn't notice that behind him, one of America's most respected men was standing up. A man who had dedicated his life to serving his country, who had commanded thousands of soldiers, who had faced life and death situations without ever losing his composure. But above all, a father who was watching his daughter being destroyed by a coward who didn't even deserve to breathe the same air. General Robert Williams rose slowly from his chair. His steps echoed on the marble floor with the authority of 40 years of military command. Michael, still caught up in his cruel monologue, felt a presence behind him and turned around. He found himself face to face with General Williams. The man he had always considered just a soldier now towered over him with all his authority, eyes cold as steel. The silence that fell in the church was total. Robert didn't raise his voice. When he spoke, every word fell in the silence like a sentence. He explained with glacial calm that he had heard every word, that he had seen how he had humiliated a woman who loved him. What he had done was not only cruelty toward Jessica, but disrespect toward everyone present. Then he addressed Jessica directly. He told her he was proud of her, that no man in the world had the right to treat her that way. He reminded her who she was, a Williams, daughter of a family that had always put honor before profit. Robert turned to the guests and invited anyone who still had a shred of decency to leave that church. The guests began to stand up, first the military colleagues, then family friends, then all those who understood they had witnessed something profoundly wrong. Michael saw the church empty out. His own family members seemed embarrassed. For the first time he began to realize the consequences of his actions, but the most important moment was yet to come. Jessica was about to show everyone what the daughter of General Williams was made of. Jessica remained motionless for long seconds, absorbing her father's words and feeling a profound transformation happening inside her. It was as if she were awakening from a 2-year nightmare, as if she finally saw Michael for what he really was, a manipulator who had mistaken her kindness for weakness. When she looked up, her eyes no longer showed pain or humiliation. They showed the same glacial determination that had made her father famous on battlefields. It was time to reveal who Jessica Williams really was. She took off her engagement ring and let it fall on the church's marble floor. The metallic sound echoed throughout the building like a hammer blow on an anvil. Then she began to speak, and her voice had a strength none of the present had ever heard before. She addressed Michael with a calm that was scarier than any scream. She told him that what he had just done wasn't only cruelty, but the revelation of his true nature. She explained that for 2 years she had endured his poisonous comments, his constant criticism, his attempts to control her, believing it was love. Now she understood it had been manipulation. Jessica continued saying that Michael had made a fundamental mistake. He had confused her education for submission, her kindness for stupidity, her love for desperation. She had confided her most intimate secrets, not because she was weak.
Enjoying the story? Give it a little like, and don't forget to subscribe. Now then, let's carry on.
But because she believed she could trust the man she loved. Now she knew she had been naive. With surgical clarity, Jessica began demolishing everything Michael had said about her. She reminded him that she had paid for their vacations when his company had financial problems. She reminded him that she had introduced her father to the right contacts to obtain important public contracts. She reminded him that without the Williams family influence, he would never have been able to access the circles that really mattered in Washington. Then Jessica addressed the remaining guests. With strength that came from the depths of her being, she explained that what they had seen wasn't her humiliation, but her liberation. She had just freed herself from a man who didn't deserve her, from a relationship that was destroying her, from a future that would have been a prison. She said she was proud to be a soldier's daughter, because it meant being the daughter of a man who had dedicated his life to serving others, that she was proud to carry the Williams name, a name associated with honor and integrity, and that she would never allow anyone to make her ashamed of her origins or her values. Jessica thanked all those who were leaving the church in protest. She said their gesture showed her who her true friends were, people who respected her for who she was, not for what she owned. Then she did something completely unexpected. She addressed Reverend Matthews and asked him to bless not a marriage, but a rebirth. The rebirth of a woman who had found herself again, who had understood her own worth, who would never again allow anyone to treat her as Michael had done. Michael tried to interrupt, to apologize, to retract what he had said, but Jessica stopped him with a simple hand gesture. She told him he had had his chance to speak, and he had chosen to use it to show himself for what he was. Now it was time to face the consequences. While she spoke, Jessica was transforming before everyone's eyes. She was no longer the sweet and accommodating woman Michael thought he could control. She had become a force of nature, a woman who had finally understood her own power. General Williams looked at his daughter with pride he had never felt before. He saw in her the strong woman he had always known she would become, the daughter who carried forward the family values with courage and dignity. Michael, meanwhile, was beginning to realize that he hadn't just lost a wife. He had just declared war on the wrong family, had publicly humiliated the daughter of the wrong man, had underestimated the wrong woman. The days following that failed wedding were an earthquake that shook all of Washington, D.C.'s high society. The story spread rapidly through all the important circles of the capital. How Michael Thompson had publicly humiliated Jessica Williams on their wedding day, and how the Williams family had responded with dignity that impressed even their fiercest rivals. Video of the incident, secretly recorded by some guests, began circulating discreetly, not on popular social media, but through the elite's private channels. Within hours, everyone who really mattered in the country knew what had happened at Rosewood Estate Chapel. Michael initially thought he could limit the damage. He called journalist friends, tried to spread the version that Jessica was unstable, and that he had simply told the truth. But he ran into a wall of silence and disapproval he had never encountered before. General Williams didn't have to lift a finger to obtain justice. His reputation, built over 40 years of impeccable service, spoke for itself. Military colleagues, judges, politicians, entrepreneurs, all those who knew Robert knew what kind of man he was, and by extension, what kind of daughter he had raised. The first to distance themselves from Michael were his own partners. Thompson Holdings had always relied on contacts and reputation to obtain important contracts. When word spread of what Michael had done, many doors began to close. No one wanted to be associated with a man who had publicly demonstrated he had no honor. Banks began reviewing loans granted to the family business. Suppliers began demanding advance payments. Major clients began canceling contracts. There had been no organized conspiracy. Simply, in the American business world, reputation is worth as much as money, and Michael had destroyed his in a single day. Jessica, meanwhile, was experiencing an extraordinary personal rebirth. After the initial shock, she realized that what happened in the church had been her liberation. For the first time in 2 years, she felt free to be herself, without worrying about how Michael would react to her words or actions. She returned to work with new energy. Her colleagues at the law firm welcomed her with respect and admiration. Many of them had been among the wedding guests and had seen how she handled the situation with class and dignity. The story of how she had faced Michael began circulating in Washington's legal environment, earning her a reputation as a strong and determined attorney. New clients began seeking her specifically. Women who had suffered abuse, families who needed someone who wouldn't bend to pressure, companies that wanted a lawyer with proven integrity. Her career, which Michael had always tried to diminish, took off like never before. General Williams received hundreds of solidarity messages from colleagues, friends, and even strangers who had heard the story. Many wrote to compliment him on how he had raised his daughter, how he had handled the situation, how he had demonstrated that there are still men of honor in a world that often seems to have forgotten it. 3 weeks after the failed wedding, Michael showed up at the Williams house. He had lost weight, seemed not to have slept for days. His expensive clothes couldn't hide the state of desperation he was in. He wanted to speak with Jessica, apologize, try to repair what he had broken. General Williams opened the door and looked at him with the same coldness he had shown in the church. He didn't let him in. He simply told him that his daughter had closed that chapter of her life and that he was no longer welcome in their home. Michael tried to explain that he was sorry, that he had made a mistake, that he wanted a second chance. Robert listened in silence, then responded with a calm that was more intimidating than any scream. He explained that some actions cannot be forgiven, some mistakes cannot be corrected, some words cannot be taken back. He told him he had had everything: the love of an extraordinary woman, the respect of an honored family, the opportunity to build something beautiful, and he had chosen to destroy it all for a moment of cruel satisfaction. Now he had to live with the consequences of his choices. When Michael left, with slumped shoulders and defeated look, Robert closed the door, knowing that justice had been done. Not through revenge or plots, but simply by allowing truth to emerge, and society to draw its own conclusions. Jessica, who had heard the conversation from the window, finally felt a painful chapter of her life close. She was ready to write the next pages, stronger, wiser, and completely in control of her own destiny. 1 year after that wedding that was never celebrated, Jessica Williams's life was completely transformed. She had become one of Washington's most respected attorneys, specializing in defending women victims of psychological violence and manipulation. Her personal experience had made her incredibly effective at recognizing signs of emotional abuse and helping other women break free. Her law firm had opened a section specifically dedicated to these cases, offering free consultation to those who couldn't afford it. Jessica had transformed the pain of her experience into a life mission, preventing other women from suffering what she had gone through with Michael. The story of the failed wedding had become legendary in Washington circles, not as gossip scandal, but as an example of how to react with dignity when someone tries to humiliate you. Many women contacted her to tell similar situations, to ask for advice, to find courage to break free from toxic relationships. General Williams looked at his daughter with pride that grew every day. He had always known Jessica was strong, but seeing her transform a moment of pain into a force that helped others filled him with emotion. He was proud not only of what his daughter had become professionally, but of the woman she had chosen to be. Michael Thompson, meanwhile, had paid a high price for that moment of cruelty. His company had lost most important contracts. Many of his friends had abandoned him. He had become a figure of contempt in Washington high society, the example of how not to behave, the man who had everything and ruined everything for vanity and meanness. He had tried to rebuild his reputation, but every time he seemed to make progress, someone remembered the wedding story. He had become a social pariah, forced to live with the consequences of his actions for the rest of his life. One spring evening, exactly 1 year after that cursed day, Jessica received an award from the Washington Bar Association for her work in defending women's rights. The ceremony was held at the same estate where she should have married Michael. When she went up to the stage to accept the recognition, Jessica looked at the audience and saw many of the same people who had been present at her failed wedding. But this time, their eyes expressed respect, admiration, pride for what she had become. In her acceptance speech, Jessica spoke about the strength that can be found in the darkest moments. She told how sometimes life puts us in front of situations that seem to want to destroy us, but that actually are showing us the path to a better version of ourselves. She spoke about the importance of having people who truly love us in our lives, people who support us when everything seems to collapse. She looked at her father, sitting in the front row in his dress uniform, and dedicated the award to him. Without him, she said, she would never have found the strength to react as she had. She also thanked Michael, surprising everyone present. She thanked him for showing her who he really was before it was too late, for making her understand she deserved something better, for giving her the necessary push to become the woman she was now. When she came down from the stage, many women approached to congratulate her. Some told her they had managed to leave toxic relationships inspired by her story. Others asked for help with situations they were experiencing. Jessica listened to each of them, offering support and advice. General Williams watched the scene with emotion. His daughter had not only survived an attempt at psychological destruction, but had managed to transform it into a force that helped other people. She had become the living example that dignity and integrity always win over meanness and manipulation. That evening, as they walked home together through Washington streets, father and daughter walked in silence. They didn't need words to understand each other. Both knew that what had happened a year before, however painful, had revealed the true strength of the Williams family. Robert looked at his daughter and no longer saw the girl he had walked down the aisle a year before, but a complete woman, confident in herself, master of her own destiny, a woman who had transformed pain into wisdom, humiliation into strength, betrayal into growth opportunity. Jessica, for her part, looked at her father and was grateful he had taught her that honor is not something that can be taken away by others, but something you carry inside yourself. That dignity doesn't depend on what others say about you, but on how you choose to behave when you're put to the test. 1 year after that wedding that was never celebrated, Jessica Williams had shown the world that sometimes the greatest victory is discovering you don't need what you thought you wanted, and that true love, that of a father for his daughter, is the most powerful force in the universe when it comes to getting back up after a fall. The best revenge had been simply living well, being happy, and transforming an apparent defeat into the greatest victory of her life. Like, if you believe dignity is stronger than any humiliation, comment which moment of the story struck you most. Share to inspire those facing difficult moments in relationships. Subscribe for more stories of brave women and supportive families. Sometimes it takes the darkest moments to discover our true strength. Sometimes those who try to humiliate us are giving us the greatest gift, showing us who we really are. And sometimes a father's love is all it takes to find the courage to start over. Because true victory is never revenge, but the ability to transform pain into wisdom and humiliation into strength.